You're listening to Beyond the Stage from the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. In each episode, we introduce you to the artists, scholars, students, and arts professionals interpreting our world through the arts. Join us this week and every week this summer as we explore their stories. Let's get started. Talking about, you talked about the first discussion you held and talking about African American and Black classical artists, musicians. Can you connect the dots for me with bringing in Nicholas Payton? Because he his talk that he did for our Voices for Justice series, which you moderated, was on Black American music. Partially, but the talk was on that. And can you connect the dots for me for those and for our audience? And this being its own, I don't want to say its own thing, but it's bigger than just this niche, right? It's so much more, but we're sometimes only told this section. We only peg it into this one area.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, sure, absolutely. So with the feed series, it was mostly focused on classical music, and that was a bit by design. That again, most of our students are connected to and studying classical forms. So if we presented something on jazz or some other type of outside the classical realm, I felt, we need to talk about this in terms of the committee, but I felt that maybe some students wouldn't have interest in it, not because it's not important, but it may not be important to them, or they don't see how closely it's related to what they're dealing with. Sometimes I think this is another disservice. I think as educators that we make it so like and here's what matters, as opposed to a lot of things matter. Our job is to figure out how and how they connect. Not, I'm looking at this for a good 10 seconds. I don't see any validity or connection, so therefore I'm done with it. Like, no, that means you haven't looked at it long enough, or you don't understand enough about it, because probably it connects to something that you find important, right? I think people are like that. Music is like that. Culture is like that. So when we started, with the forum thing is more on classical. So with Nicholas Payton, they're kind of two concurrent and related projects. One is a feed forum. That's the Bob Coe Conservatory's attempt to broaden how we express ourselves in terms of cultural diversity and giving students a chance to learn about things outside of what we provide already. The Voices for Justice is, as you know, outside of music, but it's across different departments. We got different people at different levels who are looking at this and thinking, okay, what can we do through the Carpenter Center, Performing Arts Center, that will allow us space to get to some of these discussions. And so it's not, of course, the Carpenter Center is dedicated to the arts, but we had the great Ben Crump, so it's people speaking, Tamika Mallory, that are not musicians, they aren't artists, but they're dealing with issues that everyone can relate to, right? So it's important stuff. And so with my, kind of work with the Voices for Justice, I'm thinking, I'm a musician, and I would love to get a musician who is of this spirit, but does it through their art, right? So I'm thinking, which musician do I think would have that? Certainly, there are a lot of them that do it. Many of them that I could think of would do it. But I thought about him because for a while now, he's been, I think, in a kind of philosophical mode. But he's a great musician, but he's also thought about it a lot. And he has expressed his thoughts, I think, in very, interesting and provocative ways. So I'm thinking, all right, I'm checking boxes here. As an artist, he's an absolute, wonder. I mean, it's a real pleasure to hear him play. And he's primarily a trumpeter. He plays, keyboards. He also plays bass. He even sings, right? He's a consummate musician. So just on the artist side, it's like, wow, this guy has it.
Mm-hmm.
But he also has, these thoughts. A lot of musicians have these thoughts, but not all of them express them. Not all of them express them in the way that he does, so eloquently and so provocatively. So I thought, okay, it seems to me that he checks all the boxes, right? He's a great musician. He's also very much into social activism, and his art and his belief about life and the cause of Black liberation is intertwined. So I thought he would be the perfect person to ask to be a part of this. And so with him, he really, his whole acronym, his whole philosophy of BAM, Black American music, that he's saying, we call it jazz, you disconnect it from black people. Even though some people think, oh no, jazz is African Americans in it. Yeah, but we're talking about you might say the negative or the cons of using that word jazz, and also the beliefs connect. It's not just the word, the beliefs around it. That when you hear the word jazz, how is it used? I mean, this has been discussion for close to 100 years now. More so, I think, with African American jazz musicians. That they tend to come to this discussion more readily. Or when I've seen non-African American, particularly say white American, more even European jazz musicians, I think when they discount the word jazz, it's for different reasons. I think when they discount the word jazz, it's to say, I am free to improvise music. If I say I'm improvising in the jazz idiom, there are certain expectations that are placed on me, certain tunes I'm supposed to play, a kind of rhythmic feel I'm supposed to have, how I'm supposed to improvise in order for it to be classified as good jazz. But if I say I'm just doing improvised music, that's not jazz anymore. It's bigger than that. So I think it's a way for them to liberate themselves from that way, from that kind of the lines of style. African American musicians might do it for also that reason, in addition to, well, what does that mean when you say jazz? Some see it as a kind of a code for, I'll say the N-word music. Some see it as a way of saying that. Think about how in pop culture people use the word jazz. Like stop talking all that jazz. Or
Mm-hmm.
I saw this kid, bebopping around. Like, okay, do we say that with classical music? We say, I saw this kid who was baroquing around. Like, no, you don't have a word for it. But when it comes to this black form, oh, it's nothing serious. It's just jazz. You know, um, in the music world, there are a lot of other examples I can draw from, but like this is one that outside the music world many would know. But when we're tuning up in an ensemble, orchestra tunes A440, jazz band, B flat, wind instruments, concert band. So when we're tuning up, we're trying to get kind of in the same realm, intonation, so we can play in tune. That's very important in Western music. And it is a going saying, a common saying, that when a jazz group is tuning up and they aren't quite in tune, the response is, oh, close enough for jazz. In other words, the standard for classical is, but jazz, yeah, that'll do, right? And so I think, look at this in terms of like ethnicity or racial line. That's a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
That what is unacceptable for whites, good enough for black people. It's close enough. That'll work. That's fine, right? And so I think black musicians feel that. I mean, to be black in America is to clearly understand boxes. Because you're moving through a world that says you are this. And a lot of your energy, mental energy, physical energy, spiritual energy, is how do I fully be myself in this box? How do I get out of this box? How do I express myself so that I don't reinforce the confines of this box? I think black people for 400 years have been trying to think about that. First it's on the plantation, but now I think it's more, professional life, artistic life, sports, business. It's there. It's there. So with Nicholas Payton, when he says, bam, Black American music, he's saying, no, no, no. I'm not just talking about jazz. I mean, because when we talk about black music, it is much more of a flow than it is a stylistic thing. Not to say other cultures don't have that, but I can honestly say that as an African American growing up in Memphis playing the music, as a scholar in ethnomusicology, as a jazz musician, it's all interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at the backgrounds of a lot of professional musicians, jazz musicians, say from I don't know if they're born say up to maybe the 1980s or so, their first musical experience was not the bandstand. It wasn't some school. It was a church. And so the question is now, having come through that, what is it that they picked up? And what do they show? Is there any evidence in how they play jazz, R&B, gospel? Like, how do they approach it? And does that leave any mark? What's the mindset behind making music in the black church? We don't really talk about those things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, but as a musician, having come through that, I can tell you it's very important, right? And I can hear evidence of that in jazz, in funk, in gospel, in reggae, in hip hop, R&B, soul. You run it down, say, is it? Yeah, I say, oh yeah, that's in it. You can hear it, right? And so I think when we don't identify that, we allow ourselves and our culture to be compartmentalized. Someone's going to tell you what it is, and someone outside the community is going to tell you what the name of it is, right? So again, I think about this in terms of beyond music, but there's this power dynamic, and it's been in the new world for 400 years now. That what Europeans want to call it, so-called white people, that's what it'll be called. And they'll name it, and they'll categorize it, and they'll put it in a box, and then they'll tell you, even the makers of it, here's what it is. And so I think black indigenous people have been resisting that for a long time. And so here's Nicholas Payton doing it in our time, saying, no, no, no. Now, surely he knows the word jazz. He knows how, I'm sure when he was younger, he used the word jazz. But he's thinking about things. He's thinking of what's going to break me from this box? What's going to allow me to connect it to other things that I know is there? Some of it is the wording we use, because, words have meaning, and words bring up connotations. So I think in many ways, he's doing that kind of work, and he's forcing other people to think about it. Some don't like the conversation, but I think a lot of people find, hey, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So I think I thought about him because I thought he could really touch on a lot of areas that our communities need to hear. But primarily he's a great artist, right?
Mm.
So it's like you kind of get more bang for your buck, right? You get a great artist, and he's a thinker, and he expresses himself very well. So that was the idea behind him.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And when Megan, the executive director, came to me and she said, we're going to have Nicholas Payton, he's going to be giving, I was like, I don't know who that is. And I just went on and looked at his website. And one of the first things that got sent to me was his article on jazz is a 4-letter word,
Oh
that's
yeah,
a song,
okay.
but he has an essay on that. And I was like, this is all new to me and fascinating. And that I think ties perfectly back to what you were saying about preparing students to go out into the world. If these are conversations that are not being had, if this is not a part of the conversation, are they fully prepared?
Yeah, yeah.
And as artists, as educators, as citizens of just the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think
um,
we do him a disservice, and I'm just thinking out loud here. But let's say that we send them out in the world, and they're not prepared for these conversations. I think what may happen as a result, they are uncomfortable having these conversations.
mm,
And at this time in their life, I mean, they've already done with their degree work. They are now professionals. They may not be in student learning mode as they once were. In other words, I'm not saying they can't learn anymore, but they may not be as malleable as they once were. Or they might be of the mindset, I've already been through that stage. Now I'm the expert. I've already studied. I've already taken the test. Now I'm done with that. Now I'm just going to do. I'm not thinking anymore. I'm just, I'm doing it in this way. So I think what happens is they are uncomfortable entertaining these thoughts. And then when you present, I think sometimes you present this to professionals, professional scholars, and musicians, there might be, not that there has to be, there might be resistance because it's new information to them. And if you presented it much earlier in their life, they might have been more apt to receive it. But now they think, if it were that important, why didn't I get this in school? You're just trying to get me to jump through another hoop, and I ain't doing it. I think there's a resistance to this idea of, I see this across the nation, not just in music, but this idea of, why do I have to talk about these things? I never talked about them before, and my life was just fine. Why are you forcing me to think about these things? Right? I think we wait kind of late in these conversations, but trying to do it sooner, but making people comfortable in it. Right? Just like sitting in that. I know it's tension. As a so-called black man, I feel that it's uneasy to talk about some of these things, right? But I try to put it out there to say, you look, here's some stuff I'm thinking about, and it's really important that you know it. And I tell students all the time, it's not about you thinking like me. We don't need any clones, but you got to think. You have to know the world you live in. You must, right? And so if you aren't comfortable having a conversation, either you just can't engage in it, or how about this? You run away from it.
mm,
You create spaces where you don't have to confront it, which might mean you hire people that won't bring that to the table. You hire people in your circle that will never challenge you in this way, that will agree with and see the world and think about the world the way that you do. And the story continues,
mhm.
right? We get the same thing over and over and over again. So we have to somehow break this. I think education is definitely. So I tell my students all, I say, look, you guys, the reason I'm talking to you on the level is I want to see you move this thing forward. I'm telling you because you are the ones that are going to do it. I know that there's work for me to do on the faculty level, on the as much as I can to influence the politics of the university. There's work for me to do on that side too. But given that I have this kind of immediate impact on my students, and I want to be very forthcoming. I don't want to be I don't want to be coy about it and say, there's some things that I want you to get, but I won't tell you what they are. No, I'm going to tell you. I want you to learn this and this and this, and here's why I'm telling. So it's like, I'm respecting you by telling you, here's what I want you to get and why I want you to get it. I think when students feel like, you mean there's a purpose and a mission bigger than this grade? Yes. Yes. There's a game going on that's much bigger than you getting a degree. I want you to be aware of it. We're going to use this as a context to get to it. But there's a world waiting for you out there, and I want you to be progressive in your thinking and to really be active and moving it forward. So that means you should have thought about certain things. There's certain people you should be aware of, right? And even if you don't know, I think even if you're unaware of it, just be comfortable that there are some people experiencing the world in ways that you are not familiar with. Rather than shut yourself off from it and say, that's not mine, so therefore you need to, like, no, that's not my experience, but I love you and I respect you and I need you here for me, for my community to be its best. You must be here. I don't see that yet. That's what I want to see. It's kind of like, okay, so if you look at the sports world and you notice in certain sports, you see a lot of African American representation. I mean, think about like the NBA. Can you imagine if there were no African Americans in the NBA? Like it would last about a week. It would shut down. So this idea of, interesting enough that you, when it comes to certain needs, you know where to go. You know who to talk to. You know how to procure it. What if we took that across the board and said, this area is not complete because our African American brothers and sisters aren't here. Our Asian brothers and sisters aren't here. What if that was a mentality? And you saw it not so much about, in order for them to get space, we got to lose some space. Like, no, in order for us to be complete, we got to bring them in. What if that was a driving force? It would look very different. So that's the message I think we need to get out there. Say, look, it's not, I think diversity and when we consider diversity is more of a, like a box to check. Like, we've done all these things and look, and we're diverse. I've even heard it said things like, okay, it's like, it's like things like, it's people who are not of this mind will say things that allude to this area being satisfactorily met. And I've heard that a lot. It's kind of like, they're patting themselves on the back, cheering themselves like, look at what we did. I'm like, that's nice, but there's more. And the most important thing you can do for people that may not know like what to do, conversations. I've asked students come to me and say, well, what do I do? I don't know what I hear what you're saying, but what do I do? Step one, have some conversations. Because what the problem is, you might think, I'm going to go out and do this, and it's going to serve the community, it's going to be diversity, okay, great. But did you ask the people that it's happening to? That's number one, right? Have a discussion. Figure out what matters to them. What is their world like? Then when you act, it's with their best interest at heart, to not just what serves you. Right? You can think that you're doing the right thing. It might make you feel morally, good or even superior, but it may not actually change things. So conversations will help that. What do you need? What can I give you? What do you see? Right. So I think it helps us to grow. It can help us to grow. So that's where I am now. I've been teaching for Cal State Long Beach 17 years now, and I feel like I'm in a different place in my mind. My energy. I'm more committed to it because I really feel like there's change that can be made. My biggest fear is that I teach and say I retire from this university, and I look back and I don't see any change. I'm very much afraid of that. That I ride off into the sunset, and the door closes, and the window closes, and it's back to business as usual. I don't want that. I don't want that. So that means I have to be more active and thinking and inspiring the people that who knows. The beautiful thing is you don't know where it's going to hit. You don't know which students are going to carry it forward. You can't predict it. So to me, it's kind of fun. Like let me just cast the net wide. Let me just sow seeds everywhere, and maybe they'll come back. And when they do, I'll be, wow, this is beautiful. I didn't know it would be, take root in you. But look, it's coming back to me. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So it's like kind of like a movie unfolding in some ways. So hopefully it's an uplifting movie, but you know, a nice, heartwarming movie. But yeah, it's going to be great.
Uh, Well, like I said, I can tell you have such a passion for teaching, and I hope to one day sit in the back of your classroom and listen in, because I feel like we could keep talking about this
Mm,
for
mm,
forever. And I mean, you're talking about the change at the Bob Cole Conservatory with the students, but I'm seeing it at the Carpenter Center as well
Mm,
with the Voices for Justice series, and
mm,
I hope that that's just a start of
hmm.
our conversations, and it needs to be big. That's a first step, right? What
Yeah,
comes next?
that's right.
And
That's right.
yeah, change needs to happen,
Yeah,
starting to happen.
it's starting to happen. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think when we come together for the purpose of being more inclusive, great things happen. Always have in our country. When people come together across lines, say, okay, this is important, and especially, for those who have power, and they're looking at those that may not have that same power, and they say, I have some power that you don't have. I'm going to use it for your good. There's nothing more beautiful. A human being can't do anything more beautiful than that. To say, I have some power. Now, I think, unfortunately, sometimes we think of power as only being self-serving. Like, I'm going to use this power for me and people who look like me or my community. And it's actually connected to you not having power. In other words, in order for me to get it, you have to lose it. What if you said, I'm going to use my space? Maybe it wasn't given to me for this, but I'm going to turn it into an empowerment thing, not for me, but for you. Because I see that I can serve your community that's not my own. That's beautiful. Now, how do we get there? And not just lip service, but really get that into the minds and the hearts of our students. They really feel like, I'm doing, there's some things I'm doing in the world around me that only I can do. Right? And I'm really, and it's going to be better. So I think it's encouraging. And certainly you're right. Looking across the campus, you see some movement happening. I think it's very important for us to look for allies, right? So like that's one of the reasons why when we look at the Bob Cole Conservatory Feed program and with the Voice of Justice, I mean, in many ways I linked it so that we kind of use this Voice of Justice and say, okay, look, this is going to be the culmination of our feed form. We're gonna just put because these are similar audiences, like what we're looking at. But now, since this Voice of Justice event is music centered, then the feed folks have a reason to pay attention more so. Not saying they don't have to put it in other, but now they really see that it's
Yeah.
talking, kind of speaking their language, right? So just kind of figure out ways that those of us who are doing this kind of work and are like-minded pull together, and not just in our own kind of area, but looking across the campus and saying, okay. And again, I think it requires creative thinking because the way our campus is set up, both metaphorically and spatially, that's not naturally generated, right? It's not naturally generated that I'm going to think about, hey, what's happening in the sciences? I mean, to be honest, I rarely walk up to that side of campus.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
kind of far. I'll get in my car and drive around, but I'm not like walking a lot around it. But it's like, well, what would happen if we start thinking and if we knew about each other more? I think this is a metaphor. Again, it's like growing up in America, and we know our communities somewhat. We kind of know our neighbors, but we don't really know the people who live across town, right? And they're living in our same city. And so if you ask someone, hey, what is the city like? You say, oh, the city is like this. That might be what it's like for you. Maybe someone living a couple of blocks away and say, "Oh no, the city is actually like that." You going, "Oh no, 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 that's not. He's wrong or she's wrong." Like, no, they're right. It's just a different experience than what you're getting, right? And I think that the dominant narrative tends to be if um, if people see something that may not be pleasing or satisfactory. I don't know. Sometimes people they say it's complaining, and they don't want to hear you complaining. Stop complaining. Like it's like, well, who? How do we hear complaints? Who do we hear complaining? And do we see it the same way? When I think about kind of the founding of our country, wasn't it about patriots complaining? You know what I mean? Like saying, no taxation representative. We complain. We're getting paid. We have to pay this money to the king, and he's not listening to us. They're complaining.
Mhm.
Yet
Yeah.
we say they were great patriots. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
uh, but if African Americans or non would say, no, this is not right, well, they say, oh no, you should be happy. You should be satisfied. And things are much better. Like, why are you so, don't be so negative? I think we're kind of primed for that. Think about how do we receive complaints? From whom do we receive it? Who do we not receive it from? So again, this kind of inventory, like, we have to look at these things because otherwise we can have the conversations and we're not all prepared for the work involved. In
Mhm.
other words, you bring an unprepared person to the conversation, they're going to shut down, possibly, because they aren't prepared for it. And they might think of all the reasons of why their view is wrong, rather than what have they experienced and what do they see that's unlike my own? We all have it. I mean, ask the basic question. You say, do you think this person has different experience than you? Most will say, yes, of course, I believe that. Okay, act on it. Let it be a guide to you, and not just a kind of like a don't judge a book by its cover thing. We all say that, and then we go out and judge books by its cover, all day, every day. Right? Do we really call out our own hypocrisy? Do we really look at this? We have conversation. So I think there's a lot of great things that can come when we pull together. So seeing you guys in the Carpenter Center, I've been next to you for a long time, and it's part, and I'm sure it's on my end as well, that haven't really reached out. Haven't really met. And so in this very difficult time for our country, here we are. Here we are, and good things can grow from this. I mean, already within a few months, some great things have happened. Imagine if we have years of development,
Yeah.
and looking at other areas that we haven't talked about already, right? The programming and which communities are we trying to target and how we bring them in? What are the barriers that keep them from having access? How do we cover those things? Like a lot of stuff, right? And so I'm sure that's on the table eventually. But it's beautiful to me because I feel more connected to the campus than I ever have in my 17 years. Really, because now it feels like I'm a part of a community, right?
Yeah.
And not sitting waiting for things to happen, but jumping in and saying, "Here's what I can do, right, to make it better." So that's exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, here's to change and here's to the future for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Dr. Briggs, where can people find you if they wanted to listen to some of your music or
Mm.
engage with you, not necessarily through the Bob Cole? Where can they find you, and how can they learn more about the work you do and either as a performer and or as an educator?
Yeah. So I work with different organizations. I do some work with the Pasadena Conservatory of Music here in Pasadena, and that's more of a kind of community school. I do some things with the Coburn School in LA. Um, I'm working with the Quincy Jones Jazz Camp. So each one of these have their web entities where you can kind of see what's happening in that area. I am working on a book at this point that should be coming out hopefully within the year, definitely by early next year, and it's on the history of jazz in Memphis, which is of course my hometown, and it's been such a growing opportunity because I grew up in the city, not knowing the city. Isn't that interesting? I grew up there, but there are things about it I didn't know. So this gave me a chance to really study it, and I feel much more knowledgeable about the city and myself, like my family's history. Where did we come into this story? What was going on in the city right before this? What was happening when I was growing up? And it shed light on an area that I think we all, not we all, but sometimes I think many of us understand that we study history in a kind of generic way. That we kind of get the federal, the national history, who was president, what was the war, but not a lot of local history. Like, why is that street named that? Why do they call who goes to that school? And has it been the same people going to that school? Who lives in this neighborhood? Has it always been the same? When did it change? What kind of came before it? What led to this? And so by studying Memphis, while I'm talking about jazz, I'm also talking about the city and the social history, the religious history, political history, geography, all these things. And so that's going to be another kind of part of my professional work, and that'll be another way for people to see kind of what I'm doing and what I'm about.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
all right. Well, we'll have to share that when it comes out. We'll definitely share it
Absolutely. A
on the
book
Carpenter
signing.
Center. Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Um, to close every session, I've been doing just a couple, I call them rapid questions, just a couple, few fun things to share with the audience. So we'll dive into those now. What are you listening to right now? Do you have any recommendations for what you think, what you want to share with our audience, what they should be listening to, what you've been enjoying over the past few months or year?
Wow. Um, my listening tastes are pretty eclectic. I listen to a lot of music, different types of music. Some of it, is in line with my professional kind of main emphasis, but a lot of it might be somewhat surprising, right? So I listen to a lot of classical music. Recently, I've been listening to a lot of Beethoven. I really like. He's my favorite composer.
Mm,
There's a piece that I often encourage students to listen to, and it might sound a little weird, but here's the piece, and here's a way to listen to it. All right.
okay.
So Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral. Symphony number 6, not number 5, not that one, right? That's a famous one, but
Yeah.
the one after that.
Okay.
That to me is the one that is, I don't know, it's subjective, but most beautiful because I
Mm.
think it captures all the types, the feelings, the emotions of being human. I think it's all in it. Like you feel the anger, the sadness, the happiness, the hope, the courage. It's all in it, like different parts of it. So listen to this piece in a car as you're driving on the 210 freeway. I'm in Pasadena. So the 210 freeway, not just any day, but in the winter time, I think January, February, one day, the morning or so after a rain.
Huh.
It has to rain the day before,
Okay.
has to be clear the next day.
Yeah.
You're driving on the 210 and you're looking at the mountains. That's the soundtrack.
Okay. I
That's the piece.
and yeah, because in LA when it rains, the next day it's usually clear.
That's it. You
You
got it.
haven't seen it.
Yeah,
You maybe haven't seen the mountains in a while. They're there.
that's it. You got it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to
Breathtaking.
do that.
Beautiful. So that's one. Another kind of thing that I find something exciting. There's an Egyptian singer. Part of my studies was studying, looking into Arab music. So music of the Arab world, and there's an Egyptian singer named Kulthum. Kulthum was like and they called her the Elvis Presley of the Middle East, right? She's a woman. She was an incredible singer, and so of course she's singing in Arabic. So you have to look at what she's singing about. But she had a religious upbringing where she could recite the Quran, but she also became like a popular icon because she could interpret songs and the meaning so well.
Mm.
And she became, she's now deceased. She died in the 70s, I think 75 or so. But even if you don't understand Arabic, you listen to her and hear that there's this kind of she has the ability to express something. You feel it, right? And so as a musician, I'm in awe of it. As an ethnomusicologist, I'm excited about it because of the way that she tended to speak to people in that region of the world. So much so that the more or less the entire so-called Middle East would shut down on Thursday nights when her broadcasts were going on. Shops would close, taxi cab drivers wouldn't drive. People would put on the side of the road to make sure they hear. Go home, turn on the radio. Thum is singing, right? So when I listen to her, I'm thinking, wow, there's some. Do we have anyone like that? Now, I think we have some great artists, but I don't think you can say when this person is singing, United States shut down. I don't think we have that. I think we're too compartmentalized, first of all. Maybe how we take music is so very, very different. But to think about that, it could be a time thing as well. So I've been listening to a lot of her stuff as well. Gospel music, some of it being. I went back to my father passed away a few weeks ago, unfortunately.
Oh,
So I
so
went
sorry.
back home to Memphis, and I'm thinking more about my younger years
Mm.
and how I grew up, and certainly gospel was a big part of it. So when I hear certain pieces, it's like time travel. I think we all have that. There's some music that can take you back to what it was like when you were 5 years old. What kind of smells were in the house, and what kind of food were you eating? What kind of clothes were you wearing? Like what were you thinking about? That music can be like a time transport like that. So I feel a growing interest in gospel, that period of gospel music, thinking about what was going on, what was happening. And of course, jazz, man. I'm listening to a lot of jazz every day. Um, and so it depends on which space I'm in, what I'm listening to. Like I kind of, I have certain things in my car and certain things in my home studio, certain things on my phone. Some of it is based on teaching. It's like it's a lot of ways that I go. I also like country music, which this is one of the surprising parts that when I tell people I like country, some are like, "What? Really? Why you like country music?" And in some ways, I'm interested in the responses. I think what is it? What is it? And I have some ideas about what it is, but what is it that would be a shocker? Right? Obviously, when you think about country music, you think, okay, working class, rural, so-called white, singers and communities. But while I'm not white, I'm not, from working class background. I am a Southerner, and I'm from Tennessee, right? So that's like the mecca of country music. So it's not strange if you didn't see me and I just said, look, I'm a man, born in Tennessee, born and raised, and I like country music. If you didn't take into account my so-called race, you would say, of course you do, right? It makes sense. But when you think, oh, but he's black, then now you start to think, well, what should he like, and what should be outside of his, kind of his listening choices. So I find that music really is about humanity. And the same thing I preach to my students that it's a journey, and do you have the courage to go against the grain? Do you have the courage to step outside the box? We celebrate that in American culture a lot. Movies celebrate it. We talk about it like march, you be your own drum, don't follow it, you be the leader. We say all that stuff, but when people step outside of the social expectations, they usually pay a penalty. They usually pay a price. Even though we just said, don't follow the pack, do your own thing. But we don't add. But if you do it in the way we don't like it, there'll be you're
Yeah.
going to be an outcast, right? And so when I was younger, I didn't tell anyone I liked country because I was afraid. I was afraid that people would say, "Oh, you're a wannabe, or you're a sellout, or you're not really black." Now I'm old enough and confident and comfortable enough in my own skin to say, "Yes, I like country music." And if I didn't admit that, I would be denying a part of my humanity, and would also be not fostering the conversation that, which to me is very logical, given that I grew up hearing it. It would be strange if I didn't have some kind of connection to it, right? Much in the same way, I mean, you mentioned your mother having a British accent. Like, okay, well, kind of a no-brainer. The reason she has a British accent, she grew up hearing people with a British accent.
Mhm.
So if I grew up hearing people playing country music, I'll probably like country music, or at least
Yeah.
know something about it, right? But even though professionally, if I joined a country band, that would be a whole different experience, professionally, in terms of acceptance, like than if I joined a jazz band. Right. So I think that's in the mix as well. Like, where do you find yourself being received? Where
Mm.
do you find yourself, kind of I'm not saying your place, but, kind of comfortably received? 'Cause that's a part of it too. If you're going to make your living, it's probably going to be in an area where you can excel or you're allowed to excel or find an audience. So I think even though it is changing, that blacks are showing up more in country music, um, it's still a way to go for when it comes to that. The association of black people with country, even though country is southern rural music. Well, there are lots of southern rural black people who hear country music, but you say, no, 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 that's not for you. It's a very kind of a head trip that we do that.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing
yeah, you're
that.
welcome. Yeah, no, it's always a lot. Yeah, I never answer a question simply.
No, it's great. There's a lot to think about, and I mean, I don't know, but I think I remember reading somewhere, or maybe I heard it on a video or something interview somebody was doing, that like a lot of country music actually has its roots in
Mm-hmm.
Black music, Black American
Mm-hmm.
music, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting that it's that's now the narrative, because that it actually has
Yeah,
its roots somewhere else. And so
absolutely, absolutely.
when did that happen?
Yeah, yeah. When did
Maybe.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
another discussion. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, and I think that is also a part of America.
Mhm.
That's also a very common part of American society. That often the way things start versus if they're commercialized, how they are marketed and who they're marketed to might be different than their origins. Were showing. So there are all these forces at work, and I think that's worthy of study because I think that affects our understanding of who we are, who we think we are. Certainly, you're right. It's happened in country. It happened with rock and roll. It's happened to
Mhm.
a degree with jazz. It happened to a much lesser degree with hip hop. But certainly, there is this sense of okay, like where does this music come from? And since most of us are we are knowledgeable of the commodified version of the music. That's when we
Mhm.
we become aware of it once it's sold, right? Well, how much has happened on the way to that spot, in the market? Like where did it come from? We only know based on what they tell us it is. And if the object is just to get us to become fans, they may or may not share with us what the origins are if it's incongruent with the demographic they're trying to sell it to. When I think about country music, if you told a lot of whites, not to say all, but many in the South, by the way, this music was heavily influenced by African Americans, some probably wouldn't like it. Or if you said that, I know for sure when I taught a history of rock class, even in California, that when we start sharing where rock and roll came from, even in 2021, there's some like, oh, are you sure? Is that right? Because it's now messing with their narrative. It's messing with what they thought they knew. And so rather than go through the work of reassessing and more honestly looking at the origins, they rather resist your, kind of your opening of trying to open up their thinking of it. So I definitely think you're right that has happened and it is happening. And the more we study where we have been and how it's happened, I think we are aware that it's a part of who we are. In other
Mhm.
words, we aren't looking at this as a one-off thing. Oh, it happened to him and now it's done. Like it is happening.
Mhm.
It has happened. It is happening. Are we aware of it? Right? It's looking at, if you look at, for example, the gender inequalities. Is it just happening here? No. Hundreds of years, might be thousands of years in the making. We're just looking at it now, and we have a name for it. Me too. But it's been happening, right? We just got a name for it now. And so, much in the same way, it's hard to get people to really stay focused on that because I think it's so ingrained in what we expect in our interactions and so forth. I mean, there's some men, unfortunately, that believe that a woman's sexuality is for only their pleasure, or her body is just for them to gawk at, and if they want to grope her, they can, and she shouldn't be so uptight, right? That she really is, it should be a compliment. Now, it's like that kind of craziness. But I think it's that same thing. It's who we are. It's
Mhm.
not like, well, let me say one more thing. I'm into a lot, but I think sometimes, and I think in our country, we don't have a deep understanding of things. And it's not because we aren't smart people. I think it's because of how we're taught to think. Like we all can be thinkers, but you can be taught to think a certain way. And I think it's what happens. So when something gets to an egregious state, in other words, it's like it's now really obvious that there's a problem, then we respond. And sometimes we only look at that and it's kind of like, I'm using an analogy, it's kind of like if it's cancer and it's stage 4, then we see it. But if it's stage 1, like, oh no, there's no cancer here.
Right.
It has to get really bad for many people to say, oh yes, I see what you mean. Oh, that's horrible. But what about, a woman walks down the street and construction workers whistle at her? Was it rape? No, but it's that mentality. It might, in other words, someone might think, oh, I can whistle at you. And in fact, if you don't turn around and acknowledge my whistle, I'm going to start cursing at you next because you should have received my compliments. What is that? Some kind of ownership. There's something there. And if we're in a space where it's just you and I might think I have that same right to control your body. We have to see it as being connected, right? So I think when we talk about race, gender inequality, as Americans, I think sometimes we only respond when it gets to that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Because we'll always be dealing with symptoms and not really causes, right? Because symptoms like having a disease. Well, once I show the outward signs, now I'm going to deal with it. It might be too late. I'm not saying with race is too late or with gender is too late, but at that time you already let it fester, right? It's already manifested. What if we start dealing with that sooner? Right? And
Mhm.
of course, there's a fight against that. Like some people don't want to get that. They don't want to have that conversation when they think there's no issue. That what that says to me is they see this as a one-off thing. They see this just an incident. There are a few bad apples, whatever it is, right? And so, but it's not really something that we all have to be concerned with. That shows that they don't really understand it, right? There's something wider there. But do we have the freedom to express ourselves? Do we foster conversations with people that is happening to? Do we open up spaces to hear what's happening with some minorities, so-called black people and others? What's happening with women? Do they feel safe in saying, here's how I think in some ways it's like, like kind of like a victim's syndrome. I took the name, I'm not a psychologist, but when you condition so long in that, it seems normal. It seems natural. And you don't even realize how oppressed you are. Right? So it's just, I mean, I've had some conversations with women that have said things like, oh, he just men being men. It's like no. How is that okay? Right? And so, how much do you tolerate before you say it's a problem? There should be a zero tolerance for it. Teach young men to be respectful and to know that if you don't want anyone to abuse you and use you and call and make you a piece of object, you wouldn't like that. So why are you doing it to someone else? But we got to keep pressing that. And that can't be like when things get bad conversation. It has to be, no, let's make it, it's like, kind of like, knowing we're going to have some bumps along the road. Let's prepare the car for it now,
Mm.
right? It's coming. Let's just get ready for it now. Let's not wait
Yeah.
until we hit it. Then say, oh, we need some new tires. Too late. Too
No.
late. So, you didn't ask me all that, but that's,
No, that's
that's,
great.
that's kind of where I'm going. But,
Yeah, it's all related,
mm-hmm,
definitely.
mm-hmm,
I have one last question,
yeah.
and that is, we're at the point now. California is talking about June 15th is the opening date.
Mm,
Not sure what that's going to mean yet, but things are we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for this pandemic, at least to some degree.
mm.
And um, I've been asking everybody, what are you most looking forward to? Not just professionally, not just in terms of the campus, but you personally, what are you looking forward to as we near the end of this
Mhm.
pandemic
Yeah.
and whatever comes next?
Yeah, what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to I'm most looking forward to changing spaces.
Mhm.
Living in Pasadena, teaching in Long Beach, I am used to being in different spaces, and I've realized over this COVID hiatus that there's an energy you get from certain spaces, and the movement from one space to another, even though it requires energy, it also gives you energy,
Mhm.
right? And so I teach from home now, so I wake up, get dressed, take a very short walk to my studio behind the house. Now I'm at work, right?
Right.
I don't have to get in the car. There's no drive, and so while it is easy on some levels, like I'm just doing it. I also realize what have I lost? Right? It's like a give and take. Um, I lost that drive time, which you might say, well, that's great. Yeah, it is. But also, I realize that there's a transition point. When I leave home, I'm getting ready mentally. I'm playing some music. I'm listening to the news, whatever. Then when I get to campus, now I'm ready to teach.
Mhm.
I had to get a different rhythm because now I wake up and it could be 30 minutes before my class starts, and now I get ready and I go in and teach. So I had to figure out how do I get that same energy, the same momentum.
Mhm.
I'm starting to figure it out, but it is different. It certainly is different. I never realized how much. I'm sure there's a word for it. I never realized how much I'm connected to the spaces that I'm in. Right? That
Yeah.
I feel a certain way in certain spaces. I feel like, hey, this space is for work. I'm getting in. This is space. This is where I relax. This is where I go to practice. This is where I go to read. I'm very spatially oriented, um, and I'm having to do a lot of things that I didn't have to do before in the same space. That's a kind of a challenge for me to figure out how do I do my professional work and my own private studying and my music writing and practicing all in the same space now. All right, so I'm looking forward to changing spaces. Like back to kind of an office. I mean, I've been in my office in Long Beach in so long. Right, it's like it'd be nice to just go to my office. Oh wow, this is nice. I can go down and sit down and got my books here, and it's really wonderful to see students walking around. I'm looking forward to that. You know that it's a Southern saying: you don't miss your water till your well runs dry.
Mhm.
All right, so when it's gone, you realize, hey, that was really nice. But while you're
Yeah.
doing it, you think, ah, I can do that any old day. So
Yeah.
now you realize, actually, I can't. And it would be nice to go back to some of that. Right? Some of that. I'm sure once I'm driving again, I'd be like, "Oh, this is awful. There's so much traffic," and I'm like a complainer, complaining. So, but it's this idea. So I do look forward to that, like seeing people and moving around. Kind of like we said at the beginning of the session, that when you have that kind of balance, then coming back home, not to say it's not pleasurable already, but you just feel like, ah, now I'm back home
Mhm.
and I can rest. But if you've been home all day,
Yeah.
then you don't really feel that. It's like, oh, look at that. There's a couch again. But that couch is golden after coming off the freeway for an hour and a half. You know what I mean? It's like, wow. It's like,
Yeah.
so I think it taught me that we need that. I need that. I don't know if everyone needs it, but I need this kind of changing of space. I think I function well, with that while moving around, not just the same thing. But human beings, as you know from moving around, we're very flexible. We're more flexible than we understand. We can adapt to all kinds of situations, right? We can make it work, but it's just sometimes situations have to teach us that we can make it work, right? Life changes force us to say, actually, you can do it. If you told me before you're gonna teach over a year online, oh no, no, not me. Like, no, I'm an in-person kind of teacher. I don't want to do it online. Now I'm like, hey, this ain't half bad. I think I can do it, and it's been all
Yeah.
right. And I've been able to get information across, and some things I can actually do better online. I wouldn't have known that unless I had been forced to do it. So it's also taught me, don't always think you know. Don't always think you know how it's going to be because life can show you other things. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that, but also not forgetting what I've learned in this period.
Absolutely, and we kind of it's interesting, we kind of come full circle now to, like, a conversation we were having at the beginning about space and
Mm.
about, teaching online and what taking things forward with us, absolutely. I can totally agree with that. That, and changing spaces sparks our creativity, sparks our imaginations, gives us fresh perspective on the world
Mhm,
around us.
mhm.
I find
Yeah,
personally.
absolutely, absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
Ray, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited when we come back in the fall to see what the feed program is doing, and for continuing the Voices for Justice series as
Mhm.
well. We made
Absolutely.
that announcement at our last event, and
Yeah,
I know we're in the planning stages.
yeah.
Uh, but thank you so much. I really
Oh,
appreciate it, and
thank you, Olivia.
absolutely,
You've been a great host.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Beyond the Stage is produced by the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. Views expressed by guests of the show or the host are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the university. A special thanks to today's guests and to the entire staff of the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, including our executive director, Megan Klein-Crockett. Audio engineering is provided by Ken Beaupre, graphic design by Patty Laurel, digital communications by Franz Newman, and additional marketing and media assistance by Amber Legaspi Valdez. Our theme music is by Ken Beaupre. If you'd like to support Beyond the Stage or the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, please visit us online at carpenterarts.org. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.